you think you did everything right to pass the CFP exam. You read the book, you did thousands of questions, you put in your 250 hours like good boys and girls, and that's exactly why you failed. What you did when you did all those questions was you trained your brain to recognize answers. But the CFP exam never asks you to recognize answers. It doesn't care how many hours you studied. And although a lot of providers out there are going to harp on the number of hours you study, today I'm going to show you why studying 250 hours is a problem and how you can cut that study time down by 25% or more. Now, I've coached hundreds of CFP students at this point, and there's a trend going on. Every time a student who has failed the exam, who's put in the 250 hours, who put in the time, who put in the effort, who put in the discipline, they all walk out feeling like the exam bait and switched them. And if you walked out of the exam feeling like you got the rug pulled out from underneath you, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Here's the problem. You don't have an effort problem. You don't have a time problem. You don't have a discipline problem. You don't have a Q bank problem. You don't need more quick sheets or videos. The problem is you have to understand how your brain works and how it recalls information. And our human brains are incredibly efficient, but also incredibly lazy. So when you train your brain to do something in a specific way, your brain is going to find the most efficient way to do it with no wasted movement. Now, when you do thousands of CFP practice questions, you're training your brain to do something in a very, very specific way. I read the question, I look for my cues, I look at the answer choices, I start reading the answer choices, I start slicing and dicing the answers, get it down to 2, and then I pick the best answer from there. And when you're doing this in practice, absolutely fine. I'm doing a retirement quiz, I know what the retirement questions are going to be. I do an investment quiz, I know what these investment questions are. I know when it's written in this way that it's likely to be this answer. Except when the exam gets tighter, the questions get closer together. When all the nerves in the room start coming together, this is where it all breaks down. Let me share something with you. When I moved to California, I was very naive on driving around California. And everything is different than where I moved from in New Jersey. And so initially when I was driving around the roads, I would depend heavily on my GPS. I'd put my phone, I got a little holder for it, I plug it in, and I'm driving around, and I would really depend on that GPS. And, after a couple of weeks, I started feeling more comfortable. All the roads started to look familiar. I knew the names. I kind of knew where I was going. GPS would say left. Yep, that makes sense. GPS would say right. Yep, that is here and that is here. And I remember one night, I was out to dinner. I just met this group of people and they said, come to dinner, Joe. And by the time I got to dinner, my phone is at 10%. And by the end of dinner, my phone was dead. My charger's not in my car, but I'm 6 miles away from home. How difficult could this possibly be? Everything was familiar. I've been driving these roads for weeks. All the names looked right to me, except I made a huge error. Everything at night looks different. So what was supposed to be just a couple of turns, 10 to 15 minute ride home, ended taking me probably an hour to an hour to 15 minutes. Without my GPS, I didn't really know where to go. I thought I was going down one road. I was going to make a right. I end up making the right earlier because it looked familiar. Oh my God, I start panic because it doesn't look like I thought it was going to look. I start turning right, turning left. By the grace of God, an hour later, I end up turning onto the right road and getting myself home. Now, as you can see, I thought I knew where things were because I was depending on my GPS, but I didn't really know where things were. I thought because I had seen the names and the cues before that I knew where I was going. But without my GPS, I didn't really know the roads. I didn't know what connected where. I didn't even really have the sense of what landmarks were or what orders the streets were coming in. Now, I know a lot of study providers are going to tell you the more practice questions you do, the more you're going to get better. You just got to keep working on your weaknesses. I know that that's going to be the case. But what you're doing is training your brain to only operate with GPS. Now, as you can imagine, that night taught me more in an hour than I had learned in the month prior. I learned where the streets actually were because I messed it all up. And I quickly learned that, hey man, I got to turn off my GPS and actually pay attention to the road. I have to know that this street connects to this street and this connection, and none of that would have ever have happened. I wouldn't have learned the mode if I was just depending on my GPS. I just would have been another person that depends on their GPS and not know where to go. Now, as you can imagine, that's uncomfortable. I didn't really love doing this because I got lost a bunch of times. I ran into some roadblocks, but when I started connecting things, woo, it felt amazing and it stuck. I knew where I was. I didn't need my security blanket. And for you, it's going to be exactly the same thing. Initially, training without multiple choice is terrible. But the second that you start to make connections, it's so encouraging, and you will know the material in a way that you've never truly understood it before. But you can only get to this point if you do it from scratch. No hints, no clues, no GPS, you and the problem. It's not the easiest way to study, but it's the best way to study. At some point, you're going to have to work really, really hard through this material. You're better off doing it sooner rather than later. Go through the hard part first, then you can cruise into the finish. The best example of this is somebody that I had in my November 2025 group. And when we met and we started going through the process, I put a couple of multiple choice questions in front of him. And I said to him, answer this and I'm going to cover up the answers. And you wouldn't believe how shocked he was of how little he actually knew without actually seeing the answer choices. Now, when we started digging in, he told me his study plan. He said, Joe, the first time I took this exam, I didn't really study very much. I didn't do well, but I didn't think that I was going to do that bad. So I got really motivated the second time around. And my plan was simple. I was going to grind it out. I was going to do a ton of questions. And when he talked to people in his office, they said, barrel through the material, get to the practice questions, do as many practice questions as you possibly can. And he took that to heart. He studied for 480 hours. His result is he got 5 reds. Now, that is incredibly disheartening to put in all of that work to go and get 5 reds. The number one part of his study plan was he was never allowed to study more than 3 hours inside of our program because it wasn't about time anymore. It's about what he did in that time. Taking away that security blanket and that crutch for him and making him answer questions straight up, explain it to his peers, do it in the group setting, teaching it back to other people, it made his head hurt. It frustrated him at times, but it is exactly the first thing that he said helped him pass. So now that you know this, you have a choice. You can continue doing multiple choice and you can continue grinding it out and putting in the hours and ending up in the same place. Or you can do something about it. You can take the road less traveled. You can study the right way. And especially if you're somebody who's doing this for your career, you really want this material to stick. So what I've done is I've set some time aside in my calendar. Click the link right beneath this video, and you and I will sit down for 30 to 45 minutes. We're going to find out what you really know and what you don't. And I'm going to show you how to fill those gaps and whether my program is a right fit for you. Stop following the rules that don't work. Train your brain to actually answer questions. Get the information to stick, because that's how you make a lasting connection, and that's how you pass this test. I am Joe 𝗕𝗢𝗢𝗓, and I help students make their next attempt their last.